Hello and welcome back to Revender in Sports and a discussion on gearing. I get this question a lot. Should I go from a 2x to a 1x, or why is there such a thing as a triple, and things like that. So I thought I would cover this, and we could spend a lot of time on this, so I'll try to not make it a very long discussion, but I might have to do several videos to cover this material. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about, using my Lake sizing ruler. First thing I want to talk about is triple cranksets. In my opinion, I love a triple crankset because of the gear range that you get out of it. They are especially good for touring bikes, loaded touring. You've got all your clothing, your tent, your fluids. You've got 50 to 60 pounds of stuff, and you need a wide range of gears. In particular, you need some low-end gears so that you can get up what might not be that steep on a regular road bike, but now with 50 or 60 pounds on your bike, that means it's much more difficult. So a triple crankset. Now, this is as we're looking at the drive side, that's what these pictures are. And then these little hash marks, that's if you were to be riding the bike and looking down. So a triple crankset has three chain rings. And what's wonderful about a triple chainring setup is that you can get some pretty low inner chainring gearing. Sometimes you'll see these as low as 28. So this is an example of a Tiagra 10-speed triple. So that's nice that, even with 10-speed gearing, you still can get a triple chainring setup. So here we go. You have a 30, a 39, and a 50. So a 30, a 39, and a 50 being your biggest chainring. And then typically in the back, you may have something like an 1127. So triple chain rings, they're a little bit difficult to adjust sometimes, the front derailleur. So some people don't like the complexity of it. Some people don't like, or didn't like, if we talk past tense, they didn't like the fact, as a matter of fact, I had a customer who had a triple chainring on her bike, and depending on the race that she was doing, she did triathlons. If she did a race that had more climbing, she was like, oh, can you make sure the small and middle chainring work really well? I don't really care about the big ring because I'm going to be going downhill anyway. And if it was a flatter triathlon, she was more concerned about the middle and the big chainring working properly because she wasn't going to be climbing much. And I said, this is before she came to me, and I said, wait a minute. I can get a triple chainring to work. You're going to have all three gears if you allow me to, set it up properly. Anyway, eventually we bought a compact crankset on her new bike, and this kind of conversation goes on in my store quite a bit, and it went on with her. So triple chain rings are more a thing of the past, and so a lot of these group sets started to go away from triple chainring setups. And so we go all the way back to about 2002, and FSA got into the original equipment market, OEM, and they were putting these compact cranksets on these bikes and getting them out to the marketplace. And Shimano was like, well, we're not going to do that, especially at the Durace level. And then at the Ultegra level, they released a crankset that was not even part of the Ultegra series. And it wasn't branded Ultegra. It wasn't branded 105 or Durace. And it almost seemed like, this is a redheaded stepchild. We don't want to claim it in any of our groups. So we're just going to release it, and it just said Shimano on it. The compact crankset pretty much killed the triple chainring setup for road bikes. So we go back to 2002. FSA is getting in the marketplace. And I mean, Tyler Hamilton in the Tour of 2003 was riding a compact crankset. So, okay, now we got pros actually using it. And that lended credence to, okay, as a recreational rider, it's proven. So you should get one. Anyway, so that's triple cranksets. This is a more common racer setup, a 5339 setup, 5339. We're going to get to these other numbers in a minute. There are people who prefer compact cranksets, but right now we're just talking about, okay, a standard crankset is a 5339. And then we have the 1x setup. So in this case, a 42 tooth chainring and an 1136 cassette. Why do I bring this up? Because there was someone who made a comment on one of the videos and said, oh, I built my bike with 1x 42 1136. And it got me thinking, well, depending on where you live in the country, a 1x setup is probably great. We're going to have more 1x discussions on different videos, but if we take the country going from west to east, you've got, you know, like let's say California and stuff here. You've got these big Rockies and Cascades, and then you come up over that, and then you've got pretty much multiple states where you don't have mountains. You may have some hills, or they may be just flat for a while until you finally get back to the East Coast, where you're going to have the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Appalachians and mountain ranges like that. So there's a huge portion of the country, yeah, 1x is probably fine. Why would you need two chain rings? Why would you need a triple? So this is where the 1x setup continues to take hold. It's like, well, I ride in my big chain ring the whole time, so why do I even need a front derailleur? Why do I need two chain rings? And, you know, SRAM, my favorite component group company, they've been pretty aggressive about getting rid of that front derailleur. So they do a lot of 1x setups with these types of larger and larger cassettes. So we're going to go into this in just a minute. So triple gave way to the compact, but people who still wanted to have race type gearing, instead of a compact, which is a 5034. I don't know that I mentioned that before, and I apologize. So a compact was a 50 tooth chainring with a 34 tooth inner chainring. The standard chainring was a 5339, which you see here. And that's, especially on the gravel side, giving way to this 1x setup. One chainring, in this case a 42. So I wanted to cover a couple of things because I want to make sure people understand what may be some of the challenges with 2x, 1x, or a triple. So let's look at something here. Let's just say we're looking at this cassette range. The smallest cog is an 11. The largest cog is a 32. By the way, these individual tick marks, those are cogs, or some people call them sprockets. The whole thing is called a cassette. All right, so 36 being the largest and 11 being the smallest. When this is large, easier to climb. When this is small, easier to go fast. So 1136. Well, between those two, excuse me a sec, 36 minus 11 is 25. So one of the downsides, in my opinion, to 1x setups is the fact that you have to get from 11 to 36, which is 25 steps or 25 teeth, but you've only got maybe 11 cogs or 12 cogs to do it. So what ends up happening is, in a setup like this, the first 2 to 3 gears is a two step jump. I'll get to that. The next 2 to 3 gears, three step jump. The next 3 or 4 gears is a 4-step jump. What I mean by that is, the first 3 gears will be 11, 12, 13, and then it'll skip from there, by 3. So a 15, an 18, a 21, and then it'll skip by 4, 25, like that. And why is that not great, in my opinion? Because if you're climbing, when you shift from one gear to the other, the gaps are so big that it is very conceivable that you don't have the right gear for the right cadence for what you want to do. Let's say, for example, you're climbing in your 36, you then drop to your 32. That's a significant change, and it might be too hard to pedal on the hill that you're on. Or if you're in your 32, and you switch to your 36 and you're like, wow, that's way too easy for this hill. So you're probably never in the right gear. Let's say you're on a Dura-Ace 1128 cassette. Your spacing is only, for the first 5 gears, it's all sequential. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, those are all sequential. So you get the perfect gear there. Then you skip by 2 for the next 5 years. So you'll 17, 19, 21, 23, 25. So for the next 5 gears, you've got a very nice setup between each one of the cogs. And then the last 2 might be by 3. So like a 25 to a 28 or something like that, right? So that's much closer ratio. But if we go back to a triple, if you see a lot of the older mountain bikes, this cassette range was really small, and you had a triple, so you almost always had the perfect gear because this ratio was very close. It might have been like a 1125 in a 9-speed, so you only had to go from 11 to 25 in 9 cogs. Anyway, we're going to now move on to something else. This right here in my chicken scratch says miles per hour at cadence, at RPM. So another downside, in my opinion, of 1x setups is that if you are in your top gear, so 42 and your smallest cog, that's your fastest gear, your top end speed, 4211 at 100 cadence, you're only going 30 miles an hour. Now, depending on where you live, that's great. And especially if you are a cautious ascender, maybe 30 miles an hour, once you start going, that's as fast as you want to go, and you're on the brakes anyway. But if you had a 5311 at 100 cadence, that's 38 miles an hour. And when you're sprinting for the county sign, the county line, or the town sign, a 5311 is probably the only gear that's ever going to help you win that sprint amongst your friends. It's not going to happen with a 4211. At 30 miles an hour, we're just still winding up to that to get to that county line. What about if you had like in this case, this triple has a 5011, but that's also the big chainring on a compact. So a 5011 is about 35.8 miles an hour, so almost 36. So at 100 cadence, if you're on a compact crank and the other person is also at 100 cadence, you're 2 miles an hour slower. top end speed we're talking about. Now, some of you probably never ride at 100 cadence. I did a lot of fixed gear riding, and I can ride 100 cadence fairly comfortably, because on a fixed gear bike, if you're not pedaling fast enough, you're not really moving fast enough. So, 100 cadence, 110 cadence, I can do that fairly comfortably. 120, 130, that starts to, you're not as fluid. 130, 140 on a descent, depending on your gearing, it starts to get taxing. But if you ride a fixed gear, it teaches you how to pedal fast and be fluid. So 100 cadence on a 5311 is fairly easy for myself to do. Okay, so that's the top end speed, but what about climbing, and what about a steep grade? So here, where we ride, there are plenty of steep hills. So for example, this morning's ride, one of the hills that we did is, you climb, you roll, you climb, you roll, you climb, you roll, you climb, and then the last 0.8 of it, you've been doing this for over 2 miles, the last 0.8 of a mile averages 9.8%, might as well call it 10, and then it pitches up to 16% towards the top. So you've been doing this for over 2 miles, and then the pitch at the top. It's classic San Diego type hills. So what I wanted to look at, so we're going to get rid of this top end speed stuff so that we can remove and have more white space in which to write. So this particular hill at the top of it, 9.8% for about 0.8 of a mile. Okay, so on the metric side, it's more than 1 kilometer. What this column says is at 70 RPM, the gearing of a 4236 at 70 RPM, you're going about 6.5 miles per hour. Same here, MPH, sorry, all right? And because a 39 tooth chainring, even though it's smaller than that 42, smaller chain rings up front make it easier to climb. Even though it's smaller than the 42, this being a 28, the largest cog, 28, is much smaller than that 36. So now, at the same cadence, 70 cadence, you're riding at 7.7 miles an hour. I'm gonna put some context behind this. And then, if you had that triple, a 30 and a 27, you're only going 6.1 miles an hour at a 70 cadence. So what does this mean? What is a good way to make some sense of this? At 70 cadence on an almost 10% grade, I'm going 7.7 miles an hour. So it is faster, but you have to know that is a lot more power output. It's a lot harder to climb that nearly 10% grade in that setup. So if you're strong enough to do it, great. But if you're not strong enough, maybe that 4236 would be a better gearing setup for you, because now at 70 cadence, you're going 6.5 miles an hour. So that means your cadence would be even faster if you tried to go this fast, which should be more comfortable. And lastly, 30-27 gearing. If you had a 30-27 gearing, you're only going 6.1 miles an hour. So you've got plenty of room to go faster, increase your cadence, and be more comfortable if you wanted to. Or at a 70 cadence, you should be a lot more comfortable at 6.1 miles an hour than trying to ride at 7.7 miles an hour. If I had power numbers, maybe that might make sense to someone, or if I had heart rate numbers, maybe if you ride by heart rate, maybe that would make some sense. But the point of this video is just to show you what different gear combinations do. And we're only talking about the two extremes. The top end speed, in this case the 4211, the easiest gear 4236, in this case the 5311 or the 3928, and in this case the 5011 or the 3027. Please ask questions, because to me this makes a lot of sense, and I would like to be able to explain it to you so that it makes a lot of sense to you. So this is a primer. I guess we could do a lot more videos about this as people ask questions. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you up the road.